Hello, and welcome. Here we are to look at the first eclipse of our this year, but I was going to say of our eclipse season, but also of the year. And yeah, I think it's going to be a pretty intense one because it's called a hybrid eclipse, and we are at that point. I think I might have mentioned this already, where we are finding the eclipse axis is changing. So it has been in Taurus and Scorpio, and it's changing over to Aries and Libra, but it's in a transitional space, like a liminal land. And so this eclipse season is going to have one in the new axis, this one that we're going to talk about. And then in 2 weeks, it'll be in the old axis. And then 6 months from now, we're going to have one in the old axis and one in the new axis. And then it will fully shift out of Taurus and Scorpio. So that means that this entire eclipse season, this eclipse and the next eclipse are both Mars-ruled eclipses. And the next season, they're both going to be Venus-ruled eclipses. So this is a little bit unusual, and it will be just interesting for us to observe how it plays out for us. Of course, the first thing we want to notice is that this is a new moon eclipse, and the moon and sun are at 29 degrees and 50 minutes. You can see it here. So 50 arc minutes, that means like within 10 arc minutes, the sun and moon move out of the sign of Aries altogether. So it is at the last part of the last degree of Aries. Now, the previous new moon was also an Aries new moon, and I said at the time that we have two Aries new moons, and this is our second, and therefore it's almost like a double reset opportunity, or soft launch in the first one, and now it's the full thing. And the first one was at 0 degrees of Aries, the very first degree of the entire 360 degrees zodiacal wheel. And this one is at the very last of this sign. So that means these two new moons are bookending the sign that is ruled by Mars. It is a very feisty, fiery warrior energy. It is an initiator. Aries is birth. It is that youthful enthusiasm. It is a firecracker or a match that you strike and it just comes up into a little flame just as quickly it can go out. If you don't take it to some wood or something. But there is a lot of energy, enthusiasm, passion, creativity, drive, vuma with Aries. And we are having this really powerful double Aries reset. So as we have also discussed before, Aries is like the new year. When the sun enters Aries, it's like the new year in the zodiac, because it's the first sign of the zodiac. So having the second new moon, that is also an eclipse in the same sign, the first one at the very first degree, the second one at the very last degree, there is a lot of power and potency and manifestation possible for us. But there is also a level of intensity, because Mars brings in drive, which we need, but sometimes it comes with aggression, extra assertion, inflammation. He can be really inflammatory and intense at the best of times. But if we didn't have Mars, we wouldn't get anywhere, because he is about getting things done and how to get what we want. And Mars, who's really ruling this eclipse, is not in his most comfortable place. He is sitting here in Cancer. And he doesn't really like being in Cancer, because Cancer is very, very different to Aries, where he's at home. And the next eclipse is going to be in Scorpio, which Mars is also the traditional ruler of. And Scorpio is also very, very Martian in his actions. The modern ruler is Pluto, and Pluto is also very involved in this particular eclipse, which I'll get into in a moment. But basically, Mars is kind of trying to be nurturing, and he's not really by his nature very nurturing. But when he's in Cancer, he's trying to be nurturing. So we might almost look at the fact that the ruler of this eclipse is trying to nurture the new beginnings and not burn out too quickly, which is kind of against his nature in some ways. But it would be good for us to try and hold on to that, to nurture the seeds that we're planting, to nurture these new beginnings, because there is a lot of intensity going on. And if we forget to nurture our needs, to feed ourselves well, to get enough rest, that's going to become a problem. This eclipse is also conjunct Jupiter. So Jupiter here at 23 degrees of Aries is also very much in the mix. So Jupiter makes everything bigger. He tends to be pretty benevolent and lucky, but he makes things bigger. So an eclipse is already like a new moon or full moon, but in this case, new moon on steroids. So there's already an excessive energy. And now we add Jupiter to the mix. It's a lot. There's a lot of energy. And then, of course, it's pretty close to the node. And it's the nodes, the north and south node, that dictate where the eclipses are. So at the moment, the north node's at 4 degrees of Taurus. And this is actually the mean node. I usually change it to the true node. But anyway, they sometimes a slight variable, but it won't be too far. Anyway, that's probably not interesting to most of you anyway, but this node is at 4 degrees, so it's very, very close to where the actual eclipse is. And that is opposite the south node. So south node at 4 degrees of Scorpio, north node at 4 degrees of Taurus. And here we have Saturn at 4 degrees of Pisces. So it's trine, getting on with the south node, sextile, giving some extra support to the north node. So Saturn is all about discipline and structure in the sign of not so disciplined and structured Pisces, but creativity and flow and intuition Pisces is giving these nodes support. And what the nodes do is they say, let's look at where we've come from. Let's look at the karma. Let's look at the lessons we've learned. And let's look at the trajectory of how to move forward. That's the north node. How to do things differently. So Saturn, with that sense of discipline and order and mastery by putting in some effort over time, is really trying to support us in these karmic shifts that we're taking. In the meantime, Pluto, here at 0 degrees of Aquarius, is square the nodes. So he is exactly in between the north and south node. And that is a very uncomfortable pressure to change, because Pluto is all about power, transformation, in fact, power struggles. So it's almost like there's this power struggle. And I mean, I think we can all attest to that. It's very obvious in the world right now. There's a power struggle between the old way and the new way. And there's that part of each of us internally that wants to hang on to what we know, better the devil you know kind of thing. And then there's that part of us inside each of us that is desperately dreaming towards a better future for self and humanity. And you can see that in the collective as well. It's definitely in the zeitgeist right now. And Pluto is making that intense. He's making it more intense. It's intense anyway, but Pluto being square the nodes, and this is somewhere that we're going to have to feel into for a while. He's squaring the nodes for a while. I can't give you exact dates on that, but get ready for a little bit of feeling this stuff. It's uncomfortable, but without it, we wouldn't recognize, well, what is it that we do need to leave behind from the past? And what is it that we can bring along with us? And what is it that we do need to do to step into our future? And what is it that we should not do based on our awareness of the past? So it's an important power play that Pluto's putting into works. And I can't remember which astrologer I heard this through, who said it first, but I just love this way of looking at Pluto, about how Pluto tends to make big things small and small things big. So he brings stuff down that is big and taking over. He pulls it down to size, and then he will take something that started as a seed and he'll blow it up into something that grows bigger. So yeah, and at the beginning of when Pluto first entered Capricorn in 2008, we had the crash, the economic crash. And often when Pluto first enters a sign, he's going to show us what he first wants to break down, and then by the end of that, build back up. So it's going to be interesting also to see what that shows up for us in Pluto and Aquarius. But I did a little talk on Pluto and Aquarius, and there's so much on the internet. If you're interested in diving deeper, a lot of astrologers are giving great historical examples of those kinds of things if you want to dive deeper into that. But for the purpose of this eclipse, just recognize that Pluto he's always a power player, but it's like he's in a very strong place in the chessboard of this eclipse to say, I'm not mucking about. And remember that eclipses have a longer area of influence, and it doesn't usually actually happen on the eclipse. The eclipse is on the 20th of April. And you're not going to wake up on the 20th of April necessarily. I mean, it can happen, but it's unlikely that you'll wake up and go, oh my gosh, this eclipse is bringing me this. You might not know what it is immediately. And then you'll look back and you'll go, oh my word, that day initiated me into X, Y, and Z. And it's brought me along this whole crazy dynamic I wasn't expecting. So you won't always know exactly what it is at the time. Just bear that in mind. Also, Mercury will be in shadow at this point, getting ready to retrograde, but not quite there yet. So that's also a big part of this eclipse, because Mercury is in a slowing down phase. In fact, I think he's virtually stopped at this point. And then he's going to turn retrograde and he's going to revisit some stuff, which is really going to tie into whatever the message of the eclipse was. Let's backtrack and check on the narrative and how do we want to take this forward. So Mercury is always important to look at, also just because he is a personal planet, and we want to look at how our thinking is, how our story around this, how do we tell the story, and that will be different for each of us. So, you know, we've still got Uranus and Taurus. It's a long transit, and Uranus and Taurus is going to be conjunct Mercury. So we might be having big, shocking paradigm shifts of thinking, which kind of eclipses bring us in some ways, not necessarily specifically our thinking, but eclipses often have these eclipsing moments. Add a Mercury in shadow conjunct Uranus, which is just over here. Oops, 15 degrees for Mercury and 17 degrees for Uranus. There's going to be this and Uranus is like a higher expression of Mercury. So if Mercury is our sort of thinking mind, Uranus is like, think bigger. Revolution and change paradigm thinking, shifts, breaks, shocks, sudden movement. Meanwhile, Mercury is trying to be slower, not have sudden movement. So it's going to be an interesting dynamic. It will be interesting to see it. I keep having these in a lot of my looking at charts lately of the moment, I get this sort of feeling of like tearing metal, where it's like hard to tear and it has that awful noise and you're just like, oh! And then when it stops, there's just like something's broken. Something that used to work inside of me seems to have broken. And suddenly I'm seeing something I couldn't see before. Like there was this metal layer that was blocking my vision, and now I can see something I couldn't see before. And then we have to completely reevaluate how we identify it as ourselves, because this thing may be so big that your very value system may sort of fall apart. Your ideals, your dreams may completely change kind of in the blink of an eye, and that's kind of quite jarring. So I am feeling lately that there's quite a lot of this jarring sort of energy, because now, okay, I know something's changed, I know something's shifted, but I don't know what to do with that. Now I don't know who I am, so I don't know how to act, because nothing is what it was. So I hope this has been helpful. I hope it makes sense. I see that my battery is now getting annoyed with me, so I'm going to sign off. I've probably said enough anyway. I hope that this all makes sense. I wish you great luck for the eclipse. And remember, I'm available for readings for those who are interested in getting in touch. Thank you for your time. Have a beautiful day.